Okay, let's get started. Parshas Emor. It's always a pleasure to be able to give a parsha shir during Parshas Emor and to learn through the parsha together, because it's not always that we have an opportunity to learn straight from the parsha something that's practical and something a mitzvah that we are fulfilling today. A mitzvah that we fulfill on the same eve that we're going to be speaking about, that comes up in the parsha, is really something quite special. We are right now in the period of Sfirat HaOmer, which is the counting of the Omer, as the Torah says right over here. If you take a look, if you could see my cursor over here, the Torah says Usfartem lachem emacharat haShabbat, that we are supposed to count on the day following Pesach, so the first day of Chol Moed Pesach, or the first, the second day of Yom Tov Sheni, second day of Yom Tov if you live outside the land of Israel. Miyom Heviechem es Omer Atnufa, from the day that you bring the Karban Omer, Sheva Shabbosos Tamimos Tiyena. You're supposed to count 7 complete weeks, and that's what we do. We count the days, we count the weeks from between Pesach and Shavuos. And the days of Sfiras HaOmer, unfortunately, are get clouded by another custom that we do during this time period. It's not necessarily a mitzvah; it's a strong custom amongst the Jewish people that we have taken upon ourselves during this time between Pesach and Shavuos, as a day of a quasi mourning over the loss of the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva. But because of that, we lose sight of the fact that during this time period, every single day, we're fulfilling a mitzvah in the counting that we do leading up between Pesach and Shavuos. The Sefer HaChinuch, we've spoken about the Sefer HaChinuch in the past. It was written anonymously, the Sefer HaChinuch. It's a book that explains all of the mitzvos, where we know that, the basic reason why we do all of the 613 mitzvos is because God told us to do so. When God says go, you go. When God says stop, you stop. When God says do, you do. When God says don't, you don't, right? It's basic Judaism. You do what God says. It's not a hard sell. But the way that we connect with the mitzvos on a more emotional, deeper level is something that our Rishonim, our early commentators, help us with. And famously, the Rambam, compiled his Moreh Nevuchim, which is his Sefer on philosophy, his book on philosophy, in order to help people who were having, potentially moments of a crisis of faith in their relationship with God, to help understand the mitzvos, that they are not just something we do, in order just to, because simply God said so, like it's a dictatorship. God says it, we do it. But there's something meaningful behind the mitzvos. And this is something that the Sefer HaChinuch, which again was written anonymously, historians now think we maybe know who wrote it. It could be that it was written by the brother of Rabbeinu Pinchas Halevi, which is one of the 14th century Rishonim. He wrote the book as a bar mitzvah present for his son, that his son, stepping into the age where he now has the obligation to follow all of these 613 mitzvot. So he felt it as a responsibility as a parent to be able to help his son connect with each of these mitzvot that now he is required to fulfill. And in his commentary, in the 306th entry, the 306th mitzvah that comes up in the Torah, in his count of the 613, is the mitzvah of Sfiras HaOmer. And over there, he says that what is the underlying purpose, a deeper connection that we could find with the mitzvah of Sfiras HaOmer. He says that from the moment that the first day of Pesach ends, we shift gears. Where Pesach, the Seder night, is focused on reestablishing our relationship with God, because we have an obligation the night of the Seder to recognize that we are no less of a miracle than the miracle that took place the night of the night of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the night of the Exodus of Egypt. As it says in the Haggadah and it says in the Mishnah, that every single generation, it's incumbent upon each and every person to view themselves as if they were leaving Egypt. The way we accomplish that is through the structure of the Seder, through the give and take of the Seder, through the education that takes place of the Seder, the multi-generational education that takes place of the Seder, may not have taken place this year at the Seder, but we have an obligation upon each and every one of us the night of the Seder to recognize that we have a unique relationship with God. What do we do with that unique relationship? We start preparing ourselves for Kabbalah Satorah. We start preparing ourselves for accepting upon ourselves the commitment to then be able to follow the way of God by following the 613 mitzvot. And that is what the purpose of Sfiras HaOmer is. What's the purpose of this counting that we do? So the Sefer Chinuch says, because through the action of counting, it's like you're anticipating something. It's like you're looking up to something. It's like you are preparing yourselves for that inevitability where you're going to be standing as one nation with one soul, standing at the foot of the mountain, accepting the Torah through the revelation, the mass revelation of God himself. And that is what we accomplish every single year, says the Sefer HaChinuch during Sfiras HaOmer. That every single year when we engage in this activity, where we fulfill tonight the mitzvah where we count the day of the Omer, what week we are holding in the Omer, we are engaging in that process of preparing ourselves for the Kabbalah Satorah, for accepting upon ourselves the mitzvot. I'd like to focus now on one word that comes up in the description of this mitzvah. I'd like to focus on this word because found in this word is an amazing halacha, an amazing law that pertains to how we fulfill the mitzvah of Sfiras HaOmer, practically, how we do it, how we perform the mitzvah. And I think through this halacha, we gain a tremendous amount in understanding more about what it is that we are preparing ourselves, what it is we're supposed to do to prepare ourselves properly. The Torah says, as we just pointed out, usfartem lachem, that we have an obligation to count during this time period leading up to the days of Shavuos. What is this word lachem coming to teach me? So take a look at this Gemara over here. It's unbelievable. The Gemara says the following in Masechet Nachos, on Daf Samach Hey Amud Beis. The Gemara says the following: Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis teach, usfartem lachem, that we have an obligation to count, shetieh sfira l'kol echad ve'echad, that it means that there's an obligation for each and every one of us to engage in the process of counting. What does that mean, that there's an obligation upon each and every one of us? All I have to do is read the Torah, and I know that there's an obligation. It's a mitzvah. It's clearly a mitzvah. So what does that mean, that there's an obligation that I have to engage in this counting? I have to do this counting. So look at Rashi. Rashi says, "Lekol echad ve'echad." Rashi, Rabbeinu Shlomo Yitzchaki, is known as the greatest of all our Torah commentators. He was able to pinpoint in the most concise fashion how to explain and elucidate both the written Torah and the oral Torah in a way that no one else in history was able to accomplish. Rashi writes the following. He says, "L'kol echad ve'echad," each and every person has an obligation to count the Omer, shekol echad chayev, that each individual is obligated lispor. Each person, meaning what Rashi is coming to teach me, and this is recorded in the Rambam, it's recorded in Shulchan Aruch. Rashi is explaining the Gemara as follows: that we have a concept in halacha called shomea ka'ona, where I am able to fulfill certain types of mitzvos having to do with my speech, by simply listening to someone fulfill the mitzvah. And if they have me in mind, and I have in mind that through the medium of listening, I could fulfill my obligation, I could absolve myself of the mitzvah, so that works the same as if I did it myself. I'll give you an example. An example would be Kiddush.
on Friday night. Kiddush on Friday night or Shabbos day, we come to the table. We don't have that each and every person recites their own Kiddush, even though each and every person at the table is obligated in the mitzvah of Kiddush, is obligated in the mitzvah, as it says in the Torah, of Zachar es Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho, to engage in Shabbos and to sanctify the Holy Shabbos through the means of Kiddush. Therefore, why is it that at our tables we have one individual that makes the Kiddush, and through that everyone fulfills their mitzvah? That is through the vehicle of Shomea, that through listening, it's Ka'ona. It's as if I said it myself. It's as if I said Kiddush myself. All I did was listen to it, but it's as if I did it. Comes along the Gemara with regard to Sfiras HaOmer to expound upon the verse of Usfartem Lachem, that you have to do the counting, that you can't just simply listen to someone else count. Let's assume it was the 18th night of the Omer, that someone counts and I listen, that they count what the night of the Omer is, and I fulfill my obligation. That does not work when it comes to Sfiras HaOmer.
Rabbi,
Yes.
Rabbi, excuse me, but somebody is not muted and it sounds like they're doing their dishes or something. So could you ask everybody to mute?
Sure. If there isn't anyone muted, it would be helpful if you would be able to mute yourself. Thank you. So through the means of listening, I'm able to fulfill my mitzvah with regard to other mitzvahs, but the exception is Sfiras HaOmer. The exception is the counting of the Omer. We have to ask ourselves, and we'll get back to this soon, why is it with regard to Sfiras HaOmer that I can't fulfill my obligation through the means of listening, but rather I have to do it myself? Why is Sfiras HaOmer the exception to the rule? I'd like to, though, just take a few moments to analyze this mitzvah of Sfiras HaOmer, to analyze this concept of Shomea Ka'ona, that through the means of listening, I can fulfill my obligation. You know, Tosfot on this Gemara right over here takes a completely different approach than Rashi. That what the Torah is coming to teach me when it says Usfartem Lachem, that you have to do the counting yourself, this is not coming to teach me, says Tosfos, that I have to actually do it. Meaning, according to Tosfos, I can actually listen to someone do the counting. That it doesn't have to be that I do the counting myself, but rather I can listen to someone do the counting. So what is this Gemara coming to teach me? That it has to be a sphere, it has to be accounting for each and every individual. So Tosfos says the following. He says, Gabe Yovel, because there are other types of countings that we have in Judaism. For example, he says, we have the counting of leading up to the 50th year. The 50th year, the Jubilee year, where all of the slaves are freed from their enslavement, that there is a count that takes place, as it says in the Torah, that there's an obligation for you to count the years leading up to the Yovel. So the Torah uses the singular language of lecha for you to count. So why is it using the singular language in the context of Yovel? So Tosfos explains, he says, because Beis Din Sofrin, because it's an obligation upon the rabbinical court to keep count of what year we're up to in the Jubilee year. You ask me right now what year we're up to, I wouldn't be able to tell you, because it's not my responsibility to know. Whose responsibility is it? It's Beis Din's responsibility. It's someone else's responsibility. It's not my responsibility. It's an obligation upon the congregation to know. And it's not an obligation upon each individual, as opposed to Sfiras HaOmer, where there's an obligation upon the individual. So just like my obligation of Kiddush is upon an individual, I could fulfill it through the means of listening to someone else. So Sfiras HaOmer as well, I can do it through listening to someone else. As I mentioned before, this is not how we assume according to halacha. It says in Shulchan Aruch, like what Rashi explained, that each and every person needs to do the counting themselves. But what are Rashi and Tosfos really arguing about? So says the Bir Halacha, the Holy Chafetz Chaim, explained Rashi and Tosfos as follows, that according to Tosfos, you cannot fulfill your obligation of Sfiras HaOmer through the means of Shomea Ka'ona. However, according to Rashi, you can. That's the way the Bir Halacha, that's the way the Chafetz Chaim explained. What is this machlokes all about? Why should it matter whether or not I can listen to someone else count with regard to Sfiras Omer, or I can't. Why does this matter? Why is it that with regard to Shomea Ka'ona, it should make a difference with regard to Sfiras Omer? So Rav Yaakov Betzalel Zholti. Rav Zholti was unbelievable. Rav Zholti passed away I believe in 78. Rav Zholti was an unbelievable posek. He was the Rabbah Shel Yerushalayim. He was the Rav of Yerushalayim, and he was beloved by really all sects of Judaism. Rav Zholti, and the reason why he was so beloved is because he didn't really get into the whole politics thing. His focus was Torah. And in fact, his Divrei Torah, which are recorded in his Sefer Mishnas Yavitz, have been accepted by Klal Yisrael. You read through the Mishnas Yavitz, they are the most delicious pieces of Torah you'll be able to learn. They're unbelievable. So Rav Zholti, he explains this machlokas about whether or not you could use Shomea Ka'ona by Sfiras HaOmer as follows. Rav Zholti explains, because it depends on how you look at this whole concept of Shomea Ka'ona, that through the means of listening, it's like I'm saying it myself. Rav Zholti explains, does this mean that when I listen to someone else, let's say make Kiddush, and I fulfill my obligation in that way, do we view that as if I actually physically said the words of Kiddush myself? That through my listening, there's this unbelievable mechanism called Shomea Ka'ona, and through my listening, it's literally like I'm speaking the words? Or is it that the Torah just gives us another way to fulfill my obligation? Meaning, I'm not actually saying the words of Kiddush, but through the means of listening, that is another way to fulfill my obligation. They're two completely different paths. One is that I have a way to fulfill my obligation through merely just listening, or it's that the Torah is coming to teach me that when I listen to someone make Kiddush, it's like I'm actually saying the words of Kiddush physically myself. It's like they're a mouthpiece for me. It's like they're a ventriloquist. That it's like I'm actually saying the words myself. And this, says Rav Zholti, is what Rashi and Tosfos are disagreeing about. What does it say in the Torah? Usfartem lachem. That there's an obligation upon each and every individual. Now, if you understand Shomea Ka'ona to mean that it's like you're physically saying it, so then when I listen to someone else count the Sfiras HaOmer, that means that I'm physically doing it myself, and therefore I'm fulfilling what it says in the Torah of Usfartem lachem, that you have to do the counting yourself. However, if Sfiras HaOmer, if Shomea Ka'ona, through the means of listening, it's just another way to fulfill my obligation, so then I'm not fulfilling what it says in the Torah of for you to physically do the counting yourself. But we have to get to the bottom line, which is, why is it so important that I do the counting myself? Why? Why do I have to engage in the process of Sfiras HaOmer? Let someone else do it, I'll listen, and I'll fulfill my obligation. Why is it so important? Why do we paskin in Shulchan Aruch that I have to actually do it myself? So I think we could suggest, based on what we said before from the Sefer HaChanach. The Sefer HaChanach explained why is it that following Pesach, right away, what do? We start preparing ourselves for Kabbalas HaTorah. Why? Because we need to take the experience of Pesach, the experience of viewing myself as if I'm leaving Mitzrayim, meaning that I recognize that I have a relationship with God the same way that God cared about the Jews in Mitzrayim. He cares about me and therefore continues to have me as part of the Jewish people today. And it's just as great of a miracle. When I recognize that, I need to do something with it. What do I do with it? I accept upon myself the Torah. So many people can fall can make a mistake. That when they experience something as amazing and inspirational and motivational as something like a Pesach Seder, you know what the first thing they do? I'm completely turning around my life. That I am becoming the biggest tzaddik, the biggest tzaddikess. I am going to start doing every mitzvah with all of the hidurim, all of the most, perfect way to do it. I'm going to daven 40 hours a day. I'm going to learn Torah for 3,600 hours a day. That's it. I'm taking off. Call me the next Gadol Hador, sign me up right now. I'm the biggest tzaddik in the world because I'm so inspired. I'm so motivated. But what's going to happen? You try doing that for 1 hour, and that's it. You're done. That's it. That's the end of it. Because in order to actually have a Kabbalah Torah, in order to get to a place where you really can accept upon yourself the Torah, you need to engage in a process. And each process has patience associated with it. It's 1 day at a time, 1 count at a time. Right after Pesach, you're right. You should use the inspiration. You should use the motivating vehicle of the Seder to change your life. But just 1 step at a time. Usfartam lachem. Each and every individual has a different growth process. Each and every individual has a different way of relating to God. And therefore, each and every person needs to engage in this step-by-step process called the Sfiras HaOmer. That each day we do the counting and we do it ourselves. Because the way I'm going to count is going to be different than the way you're going to count. The way I'm going to prepare for Kabbalah Torah, which is coming up in just 3 weeks from now, by Shavuos. The way I'm going to be engaged on Shavuos in Kabbalah Torah is different than you. And therefore, I need to engage in the process differently than you are going to. And therefore, if I just simply listen to you do the counting, you engage in the process, what's that going to do for me? I'm not actually going to be fulfilling this mandate of God of going through the growth process between Pesach and Shavuos. The growth process is something that's critical. Because you know that there's another halacha that comes up in Sfiras HaOmer. What is this other halacha? So take a look back in the pasuk. The halacha is that it has to be Sheva Shabbosos Temimos Tihiyena. It needs to be complete weeks. There's an opinion that's found in the Beis Yosef. It's quoted in Shulchan Aruch. And there's an opinion found in our Rishonim that says that from the Bahag, the Baal Halachos Gedolos, which is one of those books that goes through the 613 mitzvahs, trying to explain them. And the Bahag explains that there needs to be a complete counting, meaning that it's not that there's a mitzvah each day, but rather it's an entire process, and that if you miss a day of counting, then you have broken the system, and therefore you no longer have a mitzvah to continue on the next day. Meaning, if I missed day 9 of counting, so I can't just say according to the Bahag, let me pick up with day 10, because you missed out on the complete process. Meaning each and every day I need to make sure I count. I need to make sure I engage in this process according to the Bahag. Whenever we engage in something that is tamid, anything that is day in, day out, there's another pitfall we can fall into. What's that? That when I do it every single day, it could become by rote. It could become habitual. It could just become part of the system. In fact, this idea of consistency, while of course it has the potential of it being something that could become habitual, is actually something that's quite important. You know, there's a medrash that's quoted in the introduction to the Ein Yaakov. The Ein Yaakov is a collection of all the stories of ethics that are found in the Talmud. And the Ein Yaakov has an introduction where he explains why he wrote the book. And at the beginning of his introduction, it's unclear what his original source is to this, but he quotes an unknown, mysterious medrash, an unknown, mysterious teaching from a rabbis, where he quotes a story where the rabbis had a rabbinic conference. And at the rabbinic conference, one of the main breakout sessions at the conference was, what is the most important verse in the Torah? You pick one. most overarching principle found in one verse in the Torah. And all the rabbis are trying to figure this out. Which one is it? One opinion is Anochi Hashem Elokecha, when God reveals himself to the Jewish people in a mass revelation with the commandment to believe in God. I mean, faith. It's pretty basic. That's basic Judaism. In fact, there's a big machlokas between the Rambam and the Ramban, whether or not it's even a mitzvah, because it's more than a mitzvah. It's just Judaism. Belief in God, that's just Judaism. The second opinion, Rabbi said, you have to love your neighbor as you love yourself. And Hillel went on further, and he expounded on that to say that really sums up the entire Torah. Everything else is just commentary from it, meaning everything relates back to the way we relate to others when it comes to the Torah. However, the third opinion, and this is the opinion that was accepted by the entire conference, that the opinion of Ben Azai was the one that was accepted. What did Ben Azai say is the most important verse in the Torah? Take a look. Ben Azai said, there's an obligation to bring a sacrifice in the morning and to bring a communal sacrifice in the afternoon. Really? I would have expected that the third one was Shema Yisrael, right? Like, we teach that to our kids. In fact, the Gemara in Sukkah says that the first thing that you're supposed to teach your children how to say when they learn to talk, when you see your kid is starting to learn how to talk. So there's 2 psukim you have to teach them. Number 1 is Shema Yisrael. And the second is Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe, that the Torah was given to us through Moshe. It's not et hakeves ha'echad, that bring a lamb once in the morning, and you should bring a lamb in the afternoon. Like, it's just not like you ask a random kid in a Hebrew day school. They're not going to know this verse. Maybe they should, according to Ben Azai, but they don't. What is so fundamental about the daily offerings? Says the Ein Yaakov, quoting this midrash, because the daily offerings is the continuous service of God, the day in, day out, that really shows that we're committed. But how do we combat the other side of the habitual nature of mitzvot, which is that it could become by rote? How do we combat that? So take a look. 2 psukim later, the Torah already right on it, still in the discussion of the daily offerings. The Torah tells us something with regard to the daily offerings that seems like unnecessary information when it comes to the basic fulfillment of the mitzvah. The Torah says, Olas Tamid, we have to bring this burnt offering, Ha'asuya Bahar Sinai, that was made at Har Sinai. Weren't all the mitzvahs given at Har Sinai? What does it mean? Why are we bringing up Har Sinai over here? That at Mount Sinai, it's the same type of burnt offering that was made at Har Sinai or was discussed at Har Sinai, but so what? I mean, we're talking about just the basic fulfillment of the mitzvah. These are the details over here. What do you have to tell me about Har Sinai? Why are you bringing up Har Sinai over here? So Rabbi Yosef Salant explains. Rabbi Yosef Salant was appointed. He was the next in line. He was going to be the successor to the Aderes, who was the father-in-law, to be the chief rabbi of Yerushalayim. And he was appointed because the Aderes was getting older, and he was next in line, but then he actually passed away before he could take his appointment. So on his kever in Yerushalayim, on his gravestone, it says, Nisman Elios Rab Yerushalayim. He was appointed to be the rabbi of Yerushalayim, but never actually took the post. He explains that why is it that we're bringing up Har Sinai in the context of the daily sacrifice? Because when we engage in daily service of God, we need to do it with the same bren, with the same fire that we did it at Har Sinai. That the same excitement that happened at Har Sinai, that's the excitement that we need to have when fulfilling mitzvot, the habitual mitzvot. Now, how do we make sure that when we engage in the process of Sfiras HaOmer, when we engage in this growth process that's happening on a daily basis, how do we know we're really getting the most out of it? How do we know that we are really preparing ourselves for Kabbalas HaTorah? I mean, we just said before that we need to make sure that we do these daily types of mitzvos with the same kind of bren, with the same kind of fire to keep alive the same experience that happened at Har Sinai, especially as we're leading up to Kabbalas HaTorah. This is something we have to engage in. So there's an amazing Rambam. The Rambam is about prayer. Prayer is something we do all the time. It's a great habit that the Jewish people have. We pray. We pray a lot. We pray 3 times a day. Hopefully, God willing, soon we'll be at a situation from a public health perspective that we can be back in shul for 3 times a day, 7 days a week. Prayer. We pray a lot. The Rambam deals with how do we make sure that we make our prayer meaningful. Ketzadi kavana. How do we make our prayer meaningful through the means of concentration? So the Rambam says, Shiafana es libo, that we have to make sure that we free our hearts mikol machshavos, from any sort of ideas that would be bouncing around in our head. The news, what's going on in the world, what's going on in my home, what's going on in my job, all these things that just are always on our mind. We have to make sure that we free our mind, we free our headspace from these things. Vayira atzmo ki'ilu hu omed lifnei hashchina. And we have to view ourselves as if we're standing before God. How do you do that? Sounds like a tall order to actually view yourself as if you're standing before God. So the Rambam says, Lefikach, therefore, sarich, there's an obligation, liyashev at kodem atfila, to sit for a few minutes before you start davening. Why? In order so that you could prepare yourself properly, in order to concentrate, in order so that you can pray with peace of mind. What does it mean? What does it mean to get yourself to a place where you're going to be able to concentrate on your avodas Hashem in your relationship with God? What do you have to do? The Rambam says, breathe. 2 minutes, a minute. Mindfulness exercises. The Rambam already taught us about mindfulness exercises already in the 12th century. Breathe. Take a minute, take 2 minutes to sit and just clear your head. Every day leading up to Shavuos, we have an opportunity. It's called Sviras HaOmer, of mindfulness exercises to get to a place where we really are committed and can accept upon ourselves through that commitment a deep relationship with God, in order so that we could really have the Kabbalas HaTorah we wanted to have right after the Pesach Seder. Mimacharas HaShabbos, right as soon as the first day of Pesach ends, we're so excited. Okay, then go through the process. Take 1 day at a time. We engage in the process, and it's not through just listening to someone else, because that's them engaging in the process. But you have to engage in the process. You have to be and you have to be active in your growth process. You have to be part of making the change in order so that you can experience a true Kabbalas HaTorah. May this be the Shavuos that we have a full Kabbalas HaTorah. May this be the Shavuos where we are able to really experience what it means to have that kind of a relationship with God moving forward past Shavuos. And that way, through this, God willing, we'll be able to come back soon to our shuls, to each other, to our community in a way where we're ready to go. We're on fire because we went through the growth process. We took the steps necessary to get to that place. I just want to end by thanking Mark and Shana Lebovitz for sponsoring the shir this evening. That they sponsor the shir to thank the rabbis, the staff of the shul, all the volunteers, the entire community for keeping us going during this time. We thank you very much for your efforts in doing that by sponsoring the shir this evening. Thank you, Mark and Shana, and also to thank Mark and Felicia Gibson for honoring the shir this evening in honor of David and Claire Elman. Yasher Koach to you both. Have a good Shabbos, everyone.
It's great, Rabbi. Very nice. Thank you.
I could stay on for a couple extra minutes if anyone has any questions.